Hi, Rob here. Welcome to the IELTS writing course. Today we're going to look at grammatical accuracy, in particular punctuation. So let's crack on with that. So we've talked a lot about grammar range, so using lots of different types of sentences. But of course you need to make sure that the grammar is correct and accurate. And a part of that is punctuation. Let's just quickly look at what we need to do and what is mentioned. So look for an 8, very occasional errors or inappropriacies. The majority of sentences are error-free. For a 7, produces frequent error-free sentences. And punctuation is mentioned here. Has good control of grammar and punctuation, but may make a few errors. So you can make a few errors to get a 7, and very occasional for an 8. For a 6, makes some errors in grammar and punctuation, but they rarely reduce communication, which means that the reader can read it and see that there's a mistake, but it doesn't stop the communication. Punctuation can stop communication if it's in the wrong place. It can make a sentence unreadable, or a lot of people are writing sentences that are not sentences. So remember, a sentence, there are different types of sentences: simple, compound, complex, and really in all of those sentences there could be commas, there needs to be a capital letter to begin and a full stop at the end, and commas could be in the middle, or semicolons. So commas can reduce communication if they're in the wrong place. It's unlikely, and it's more something we would see at a higher level of sentence where there's lots of clauses together. Nevertheless, we want to reduce the number of errors overall, because you might have errors in other areas, which is more likely. So errors in subject-verb agreement, or verb tense, or word order, these kinds of errors. So we want to change the overall effect by having good punctuation. For a 5, look, may make frequent grammatical errors, and punctuation may be faulty. Errors can cause some difficulty for the reader. So this is where the reader reading goes, the initial feeling, impact, is that, what do they mean here? And then probably, okay, I can see what you mean, but it's wrong. But the fact that you have to stop and read it again to try and understand it is, as you can see, typical of band 5. Look at 4, some structures are accurate, but errors predominate, which means there's mostly errors, and punctuation is often faulty. So you can see that punctuation is talked about at a 4, 5, 6, and 7. Anyway, the overall goal is to minimize errors and just get it right. It creates a better overall effect as well. So again, like we've talked about in the grammar lessons, where we talked about how to analyze and look at your own types of sentences, which means you need to pay attention to what is a sentence and what type of sentence is it and what's happening in here. What's the relationship between these two clauses? Equally here, we need to notice these small details, these commas and full stops, etc. So we need to be a meerkat, which means we're paying very, very careful attention. And, you know, it depends on your first language. So people with different first languages have different errors, typically. So, for example, Spanish and Portuguese writers will have sentences are too long generally, and there's too many commas. So that's a typical feature of that type of writer. So commas are the biggest errors. Here's the basics. We must start every sentence with a capital letter. That's the big letter. And we must put a full stop, or period as the Americans call it, at the end of every sentence. Just a note here, be careful in the test where you put your pencil. Some people tend to rest or put their pencil on the paper. So the reader's looking at it thinking, is that a full stop or not? So we have to be careful, and some people do, some writers from different languages do this more than others. The Chinese seem to do this particularly for some reason. So when they rest their pencil, it can look like a full stop. So don't do that. We want to minimize, reduce the confusion for the reader. So let's have a look at commas. We use commas in lists. I bought some bananas, comma, oranges, comma, kiwis and apples. Notice there's no comma after kiwis, meaning kiwi fruit, not the people. We need to avoid comma splices. So this is the most common error, as you can see, for native speakers too. In fact, my mother doesn't like it when I show her mistakes, but most native speakers will do this. English teachers included, by the way. But the basic idea is you cannot join two independent clauses with a comma. So subject, verb, comma, subject, verb. I like chocolate, comma, I don't eat it. This is what we call a comma splice. Splice means split. So you've split a sentence with a comma. You can't do that. And as you can see, if you're doing that, you're making getting an 8 pretty difficult. Again, most writers from different languages will do this, even English, but especially Spanish and Portuguese writers. This is a big feature of their grammar. So when we have subject verb together and we want to connect them, we can create a compound sentence. If you remember back, we need to use a coordinating conjunction. So for example, here I'm using but. I like chocolate, but I don't eat. There's a grammar mistake there. I don't eat it, that should say. I love motorbikes and I love playing squash. We could go to Vietnam, comma, or we could go to Fiji. So these commas are optional. My suggestion would be to put them in. But that's just a suggestion. It's not a rule by any means. So we use them in complex sentences too. So we use them in compound sentences and then complex sentences. Here, if you remember back, a complex sentence has a dependent clause, which would be this one here, subject and verb, and then, an independent clause, and then a dependent clause, so with a subordinated conjunction, plus subject plus verb. So for example, dependent clause, comma, independent clause. If I danced, comma, would you join me? When we do it the other way, when we change the sentence round, which is a good idea, I think. It's good to have more variety. Our goal is variety, right? Remember, a variety of structures for a band 7. Well, if it's always in the same order, a dependent clause, independent clause, that doesn't look like it's variety, even though it doesn't actually matter which way it goes. But it does create emphasis. So, would you join me if I danced? I live here as I like the climate. As means because. So technically the comma is optional. You could put a comma here. But actually, really, we only put a comma in a long sentence if this dependent clause at the end is a kind of extra idea. So there'd be quite a long sentence, complex sentence with maybe some 2 dependent clauses and other phrases and an independent clause, comma, the extra thought. or the idea. But basically, in this situation, don't put it. We need to use, so that was adverb clauses. In relative clauses, we need them when we have a non-defining relative clause. So with a defining relative clause, which means the information is essential. So for example here, the bike needs rego. What bike? There's not enough information there. The bike that I bought last week needs rego. Okay, rego, sorry, is Australian. It means registration, when you register your vehicle with the government. So in these situations, there's no commas. However, when it's a non-defining relative clause, we always use commas and we don't use that. So firstly, proper nouns, so this means names, could be Brisbane or London, it's a name, or your name, or someone's name. Storm, who I'm talking to now, will take the test tomorrow, comma, comma, okay? So we must have them here. Brisbane, which is on a river, is quite a modern city. Okay, so those two have proper nouns. And the last one, I went to a Vietnamese restaurant last night, which was lovely. So that's extra information. We don't need it to talk about, to understand the sentence. So non-defining relative clauses, you must have a comma. And you should be using these throughout your writing. In the task 1, letter for general and report for academic, and the task 2, essay, you need to have them there. You need to use relative clauses, remember. Also, we're going to use commas with transitions. So a transition is a transitive adverb. It doesn't connect sentences like a conjunction, but it connects ideas. So it could connect ideas between paragraphs, blah, 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 big paragraph. On the other hand, comma, da, da, da. So here are the positions. We've got transition. However, comma, the wife was not happy about the bike. We can have sentence, semicolon. Excuse me. It's cold at the moment. Transition, comma, subject, verb. I bought the bike. However, the wife was not so happy. And then basically the same. Number 3 is the same as number 2, but we just put a full stop. We use a semicolon when there is a closer relationship between the two sentences. Actually, personally, I would, if you're not comfortable using these, don't go there. So you can see number 1 could be the transition at the start of a paragraph. In conclusion, comma, da, da, da. This is within a paragraph. Now, most people do number 1, 2, and 3, by the way. I think you shouldn't do that all the time. If you do that all the time, it's not natural and it doesn't show any flexibility in your transitions, which are cohesive devices. So with transitions, you're being marked, and conjunctions, you're being marked for coherence and cohesion. So they are cohesive devices, they connect ideas. But also this is a grammar issue, so you need to move them around, which is what I'm going to show you next. So do these more. The transition can go at the end of a sentence, or between the subject and the verb, or if there's 2 verbs, an auxiliary verb and a verb, it can go in the middle here. For example, the wife was not so happy, however. The wife, however, was not so happy. The wife has, however, been happier more recently. So, do number 4, 5 and 6 more, if you want a 7 or more. Remember, a lot of people make these mistakes. Although, comma, blah, blah, blah. Although is a subordinating conjunction and follows those grammar rules and punctuation rules. Transitions are different, and the same with which. Again, subordinating conjunction. Okay. As I've said, most people overuse 1, 2 and 3. Try to do more 4, 5 and 6. It's more natural, more flexible. And it can add emphasis in their different ways. For example, you see, I put for example at the end. And that's what native speakers do. So do that. So transitions, transitive adverbs are adverbs, and we can also use adverbs generally in the same way. Generally, comma, blah, 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 we can use them in the same way. For example, look, unsurprisingly, the dog barked again. The dog unsurprisingly barked again. The dog barked again, unsurprisingly. So do you see I can change my tone of voice? Unsurprisingly, the dog barked again. The dog unsurprisingly barked again. The dog barked again, unsurprisingly. So I'm showing my, in this case, annoyance. My feeling is coming through with an adverb. But all these commas, as I've said, these are optional. So you need to use adverbs for better vocabulary scores and better grammar scores. These commas are optional. If you know what you're doing, if you understand everything we've talked about, and lots of people do because it's similar to their language, then use them. If this is completely new to you, don't. In other words, don't spend the time worrying about it because there are bigger things to do, more important things to fix first. So there's a few other lessons on sentence types, noun clauses, relative clauses and adverb clauses. Commas are mentioned in there as well, so notice the commas throughout, okay? And thank you very much for watching and have a fantastic day.